Sparky Tomato, and today I'm going to be reading chapter 2 out of the story Kit Learns a Lesson in this giant Kit story collection. Basically, there's several different American Girl Kit stories in this book, and we are on the second story and the second chapter in the second story. We already read Meet Kit, so if you want to check that out, it's on my channel. So now we're on Kit Learns a Lesson. And basically every Friday night at 6 p.m. I will read, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, I'm going to read one chapter out of an American Girl book or something like that. So, chapter 2, let's start. As they walked to school that morning, Kit told her best friend Ruthie about changing her wish for Dad. The girls huddled under Ruthie's umbrella. They ignored Sterling, who trailed along behind them like a puny, pitiful puppy. I didn't realize a wish had to be so specific, said Kit. Oh yes, said Ruthie, you have to be very careful on what you say in a wish, otherwise it'll come true, but not always in the way you meant it to. That happens in a lot of fairy tales, said Ruthie. Ruthie had read hundreds of fairy tales because she was interested in princesses. Also, you usually have to work hard to deserve a wish to come true. You have to do something brave, or impossible, or make a giant noble sacrifice. And you have to wait. Wishes take time. Years, in some cases. Thanksgiving's only 2 weeks away from now, said Kit. I'm afraid that if Dad doesn't get a job here, by then he'll go away to Chicago. Chicago, repeated Ruthie. He might as well go to the moon. I don't want Dad to leave, said Kit. I want the boarders to leave. Ruthie tugged on one of the straps of Kit's bag and tilted her head towards Sterling. Kit realized that once again she'd spoken without thinking. She was pretty sure that Sterling already knew she wanted him and the other boarders to leave. Still, it wasn't nice to say so in front of him. Kit wouldn't have if she'd remembered that he was there. He was just so invisible. All morning at school, Kit tried not to think about how awful it would be to watch the boarders sitting around the table gobbling Thanksgiving turkey if she knew that Dad was going to leave. She could hardly bear listening to Roger, a show-offy boy in her class, answer a question about the first Thanksgiving that their teacher, Mr. Fisher, had asked. The first Thanksgiving was in 1621, said Roger. The Pilgrims invited the Indians to a feast to celebrate their successful harvest. We have turkey at Thanksgiving because the Pilgrims served the Indians 4 wild turkeys, and we call it Thanksgiving because the Indians were thankful to the Pilgrims for being generous and sharing their food. Kit couldn't stand it. She shot her hand up into the air and waved it. Yes, Kit, said Mr. Fisher. Oh, sorry. Oh, whatever. Roger's got the story backwards, said Kit. It's called Thanksgiving because the Pilgrims gave the feast to thank the Indians. Roger snorted. Kit wasn't the least bit intimidated by Roger. The Pilgrims would have starved. I lost my place. The Pilgrims would have starved to death if it wasn't for the Indians, she said. The Indians taught the Pilgrims to plant corn and gave them supplies to help. I think that was pretty nice of the Indians, considering that the Pilgrims had barged into their land where they'd been living happily by themselves for a long time. As Kit spoke, she realized that this year, more than ever before, she had tremendous sympathy for the Indians. She knew how it felt to have a bunch of strangers living with you and eating your food, expecting your help when you didn't want them there in the first place. Well, said Mr. Fisher, thank you, Kit. It made Kit feel a little better to have pleased Mr. Fisher. She liked him, but they had gotten off on the wrong foot on the first day of school when Mr. Fisher called Kit to read aloud in the reading group. Kit hadn't known what page they were on because she'd read ahead and was busy thinking up better endings to the stories. Mr. Fisher was cross with her then, but he was happy with her now. Kit makes a good point, he said. The Indians took pity on the Pilgrims, and both friends and strangers when times are hard. To help both friends and strangers when times are hard. We all see this around us We see this all around us today because of the Depression. Who can give me examples of ways that our families and friends and neighbors are helping one another and strangers too? When hobos come to our back door, said Ruthie, my mother always gives them sandwiches and coffee. And here's the picture. Kit shot her hand up into the air and waved. The picture. So Ruthie says, my mother always gives them sandwiches and coffee. And then, at our church, there's a box of old shoes for people to take if they need them, said a boy named Tom. My cousin sent me a winter coat she'd outgrown, said a girl named Mabel. Kit was so surprised to see Sterling raise his hand. He'd almost never done so before. Sterling was new to the class and the school because he had moved into Kit's house only last summer. He didn't know anyone but Kit and Ruthie, and he was so quiet that he was easy to forget. Sometimes people get kicked out of their house because they can't pay rent, said Sterling, in his deep voice that always surprised Kit, coming as it did from such a pipsqueak. And friends are nice and invite them to live in their house with them. Oh, so that's why you live with Kit, brayed Roger. I thought you two were married. The class snickered as Roger made kissing noises. Sterling slouched in his seat. Kit shook her fist at Roger, but she was mad at Sterling too. Sterling should have kept his mouth shut, she thought. That will do, Roger, said Mr. Fisher. I'll wait for quiet, boys and girls. He waited until the snickering stopped, then asked, who can give me more examples of how we're helping one another? Soup kitchens serve free meals to people who can't buy food, said a girl named Dorothy. And some soup kitchens also give people groceries to take home to their families. Yes, said Mr. Fisher. Now, as you all know, Thanksgiving is coming soon. I'd like our class to do its part to help the hungry. Oops. Sorry. So, if you can, please bring an item of food. It doesn't have to be big or anything. An apple or potato will do. I know most of us don't have much food to spare, but if we all chip in, we can make a Thanksgiving basket and donate it to a soup kitchen. The students murmured among themselves, but without much enthusiasm. They'd all seen soup kitchens with long lines of people waiting outside them. Kit had once seen a man in the soup line faint on the street from hunger. She knew that soup kitchens were for people who had been without work for so long that they had no money or hope or pride left, and who were so desperate that they had to accept free food. My father says that the people who go to the soup kitchens should be ashamed, said Roger, full of bluster. They're bums. They're not bums, said Ruthie. Most of them are perfectly nice, normal people who happen to be down on their luck. I think we should feel sorry for them. My father says they're just too lazy to work, said Roger. And now that Franklin Roosevelt's been elected, people will expect the government to take care of them. My father says it'll ruin our country. Kit grew hot under the collar listening to Roger and thinking of how hard Dad was trying to find a job. People aren't too lazy to work, she said. They'd work if they could find a job. But jobs are hard to find. Mr. Fisher nodded. Right here in Cincinnati, he said. 1 out of 3 workers is unemployed, which means they don't have a job. 1 out of 3. What fraction is that? 1/3, said Tom. That's correct, said Mr. Fisher. 1 out of 3, thought Kit. Unemployment was a lot worse than she thought. Just for a shivery second, her absolute confidence that Dad would find a job in Cincinnati was shaken a little bit. Maybe he really would have to go to Chicago. Then Kit spoke to herself firmly. No, she thought, Dad is different. He will find a job any day now, she said in her head. These are hard times, said Mr. Fisher. That's why it's especially important to remember the example of the Indians and Pilgrims. We all have friends or relatives who are struggling to make ends meet. This year, many of us will have to do without some of the things we've had in the years past. But Mr. Fisher, Mabel asked, we're still going to have a Thanksgiving pageant this year, aren't we? Yes, of course, said Mr. Fisher. Now the class buzzed with excitement. Everyone loved the pageant. Mr. Fisher crossed his arms. "I need your attention, boys and girls," he said. The children shushed one another, and Mr. Fisher continued. "The 6th graders will be the Pilgrims," he said. "The 5th graders will be the Indians. Our 4th grade is responsible for the scenery." Mr. Fisher held up a drawing. "Here's a drawing of the backdrop we'll paint." The drawing showed 4 giant turkeys and a huge cornucopia with fruits and vegetables spilling out. The turkeys' feathers were all different colors. They were not just painted on. They were made out of bits of paper cut to look like real feathers, and they were glued onto the turkeys. "That's good," said Tom. "Yes, it is, isn't it?" said Mr. Fisher. "Who drew it?" asked Dorothy. "Sterling," said Mr. Fisher. Everyone twisted around to stare at Sterling. For the second time that day, Sterling slouched down in his seat. But this time no one was snickering. Everyone, including Kit, was gaping at Sterling in astonishment. At lunch, Ruthie said, "Sterling is really good at drawing, isn't he, Kit?" Kit shrugged. "I guess so," she said. She was still annoyed with Sterling for speaking in the class and embarrassing her in front of everybody. "Shh," said Dorothy. "Here he comes now." Sterling was walking toward Kit, his knickers ballooning out over his spindly legs. Knickers are just pants. Over his spindly legs. Kit and Sterling had to share a lunch tin, and every day Sterling came over to the girls' side of the lunchroom to get his sandwich from Kit. Usually the girls at the table completely ignored Sterling, but today when he came over, several girls squeaked, "Hi, Sterling." Sterling blushed, pinker than ever. "Hi," he mumbled. He took his sandwich and scuttled back to the boys' side. Unfortunately, Roger had spotted Sterling with Kit. He began to whistle. "Here comes the bride." Kit glowered at Roger. I don't know how to say that, sorry. Who batted his eyelashes at her across the lunchroom. "Hey, Kit," said Ruthie, trying to distract her. "Good news. There's some wood left over from our new garage. My father said that you and I can use it for a treehouse." "That's great," said Kit. She had been sketching tree houses and hoping to build one ever since she'd read Robin Hood. She loved the tree houses that Robin and his men built in the high branches of trees in Sherwood Forest. Kit knew her family had absolutely no money to spend on something as unnecessary as wood for a treehouse, so it was lucky that Ruthie's father, who still had a job, was giving away the leftover wood. "I was thinking," said Ruthie, "you know how your treehouse sketches haven't really turned out that well?" "Yes," Kit admitted honestly. "Well, why don't we ask Sterling how to draw a plan for us?" asked Ruthie. "No," Kit said. "Gosh, Ruthie, if we let him plan a treehouse for us, then when it's built, he'll want to come in and we'll have to not let him. He's already invaded my real house. I don't want him in our treehouse too." Okay, said Ruthie. "Don't get all worked up. The treehouse doesn't even exist yet." "I'll ask Dad to help us," said Kit. "He loves building things." "Sure," said Ruthie. She grinned. "And he'll be so busy building our treehouse he'll forget all about going away." Kit grinned back. "Right," she said. "How soon can we get that wood?" And that is the end. And the next one is Spilling the Beans, Chapter 3. So, yes, make sure to tune in next week at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Or you can just watch this later. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below. Because I love talking to you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Enjoy the video, watch my hair, subscribe and like the video, and most of all share this channel. I'm eating chips, by the way.